When becoming a doctor, one must swear an oath to do no harm. Comparisons in The King of King in King. One such example is Dr. Charles Friedgood, who was convicted of taking a life using tools designed to save it. From the outside, it appears that the Friedgoods led a perfect life. He'd been married to his wife Sophie for 28 years, had an 18-room house, and been blessed with well-educated children. The reality of their lives was very different. While at home, Dr. Friedgood wasn't a good husband. He was always late, even though he knew his wife would never start a meal without him. When she confronted him, he didn't give her a reason or even acknowledge she was speaking. Things got even worse in the Friedgood household in 1967, when the doctor began an affair with his nurse, Harriet. He used discretion at first, but it would soon become public knowledge. Even his daughters, who had been led to believe it was just a committed working relationship, discovered the truth about their father's infidelity. Even Sophie discovered her husband was having an affair with another woman, though she was the last to accept it. When Harriet became pregnant 4 years into the affair, Charles was powerless to conceal his transgressions. In her native Denmark, she gave birth to a son whom she named Heinrich after Charles's late father. When she and the baby returned to the United States, she was placed in an apartment near the doctor's house and given a $1,000 monthly allowance. This continued for 2 years, until she fell pregnant again. She returned to her homeland, this time with Charles, after he informed Sophie that he was attending a medical convention in another state. Upon their return, he got his mistress and 2 children a larger apartment and furnished it with cast-off pieces of furniture from his own home. Harriet began pressuring Friedgood to leave his wife, which he avoided by telling her that financial difficulties made the move impossible at the time due to a bad investment he'd made in a hotel. He persuaded her that once the courts cleared things up, the two of them would be free to marry. He gave Sophie the same reason for not being able to get rid of his nurse, the hotel. Sophie could only put up with her husband's behavior for so long. She would eventually yell and scream at him, but it was all in vain. His silence effectively silenced her words. Finally, on June 17, 1975, something changed in Dr. Charles Friedgood. They went to bed after eating dinner together and talking on the phone with their daughter Esther about her and her husband receiving their law degrees. As Sophie lay there, Charles snuck into his study and from a filing cabinet he took a syringe and filled it with Demerol. The doctor jumped on his helpless wife, yanked her arm above her head, and inserted the needle into her armpit. She struggled for up to 12 minutes as the powerful drug took effect, screaming the entire time, but the house was deserted and no one came to her aid. He injected her in the other armpit, thigh, and buttocks when she finally calmed down. She was still breathing despite the massive dose of Demerol. He completed the procedure by turning her inert form over, inserting the needle between 2 ribs, and injecting her directly into the liver. He then replaced the needle in the filing cabinet and fell asleep next to his dead wife's corpse. Lydia Fernandez, a family member, discovered her body the next day after finding her unresponsive in bed. Dr. Friedgood rushed home after learning of his wife's death. He told people about his daughter's phone call the night before and how he kissed her goodbye before leaving for work that morning. Charles suspected she died of a stroke because Sophie had had one earlier in life. He signed her death certificate after making arrangements for her burial the next day in her hometown. Sophie's death quickly spreads throughout the small town, eventually reaching the chief of police. When he learned that Charles had signed his wife's death certificate, he was concerned because in most cases, another doctor would have been used. His suspicions grew to the point where he contacted the Nassau County Police Department. As a result, the county medical examiner postponed the funeral so that an autopsy could be performed. When detectives arrived and told Friedgood what they wanted to do, he reluctantly agreed to the autopsy because a court order would almost certainly be issued if he refused. He did, however, request permission to attend the operation. Several things were revealed during the autopsy. First, much of the food from the previous night's meal remained in Sophie's stomach. If the good doctor had kissed his wife on the way to work, this would not have happened. It also allowed them to pinpoint her death to at least 6 hours after her last meal, which was before 4 a.m. They also discovered dark bruising where Charles had injected her, and tests revealed that Demerol was used, including a lethal dose directly into her liver. When police arrived to search the house for the murder weapon and drug, Charles managed to sneak up to his study and get the syringe and Demerol before they were discovered. Her upbringing overruled her sense of right and wrong, and she did as her father instructed. After the investigators left, she hid the syringe and bottles in a closet. She only had to tell her father where it was and the package would vanish. Dr. Friedgood realized he was in trouble and began making plans to leave. The first thing he would require is a lot of money. So he forged his wife's signature on documents that would grant him access to her safe deposit boxes and allow him to sell the securities she owned. He was able to obtain $600,000 in cash, jewelry, and bonds in total. He called one of his daughters and told her that he was going to spend some time away for a few days on the advice of his doctor. He refused to tell her where he was going no matter what she asked. Her husband, convinced that Charles was attempting to flee, called the police and told them that he thought Friedgood was attempting to fly to Denmark because that was where Harriet was at the time. The first time it was on a roll. There wasn't, but one such passenger was on his way to London. They arrived just as the plane was about to take off, but they were able to get it to return to the terminal. When they searched his luggage, they discovered cash, jewelry, and bonds, and he was arrested. He'd be found guilty of Sophie's murder at trial, thanks in part to the testimony of his own children. He received a sentence of 25 years to life in prison. Another result of Charles signing his wife's death certificate was the passage of a law in New York in 1978 prohibiting a family member from signing the death certificate of a relative. It was dubbed the Dr. Friedgood Bill. After serving 31 years in prison, he was released in 2007 and lived for another decade. His death occurred in 2018 while he was terminally ill with cancer. What are your thoughts on the Jessica Baggen case? I really appreciate your input. Thank you for taking the time to watch. Be a part of the Chris Crime Diaries family and hit the subscribe button now.